Hello friends, this is lesson number 35 and in this lesson we shall discuss F R Leavis. Frank Raymond Leavis. He was born in the year 1895 and died in the year 1978. He was a British literary critic and he taught at the University of Cambridge. So as we are doing these critiques of new criticism, he is also among these writers, and he believed that the poetry cannot be self-contained. Now you see the contrary opinions. The first, I said that he belongs to the new critiques, or the people who followed the new criticism, where they believed that the text should be independent of the writer, of the age, and from the culture, society, from everything. The text should be independent. But here we are saying, or we are seeing actually, that F R Leavis is saying that poetry cannot be self-contained. So he is holding the contrary views. Despite being the follower of new criticism, he says that poetry cannot be self-contained. It cannot be isolated from the age, culture, or the society. Somewhere he is saying that the work should belong to the tradition. Now remember, we went through T.S. Eliot as a critique. What he said? He said that a work can be great only by its tradition. When we compare the work to the others, only then the work should be held as a great work. Then we have F R Leavis. He is also following the same lines. Despite being the critique of new criticism, or of the same class of new criticism, he says that any work cannot be distinguished from its culture, society, or age. So remember his views. Despite being the follower of new criticism, he was somewhere following the views of T.S. Eliot, or the views where he is admiring the great tradition. The work first we have, that is Scrutiny. Actually it is a journal, and he continuously published this journal in collaboration with Queenie Dorothy Leavis. Queenie Dorothy Leavis. She was actually his student first, and then she became his wife. And in this journal, they wrote a few of the articles in which they criticized the Bloomsbury group. Bloomsbury group. So who were the people among the follower, or the part of this Bloomsbury group? So try to correlate this work, or this word bloom. Bloom we can correlate with wolf. So it may be a good idea to remember this point as well, that Virginia Woolf, she belonged to Bloomsbury group. Can be asked in a paper that Bloomsbury group, and in that group who the people were. So you can have one name, that is Virginia Woolf, and she worked with her husband, and the name of her husband is Leonardo Woolf. So we have two pairs. The first, F R Leavis and his wife Dorothy Leavis. They wrote, or they published, the journal Scrutiny, and in that they wrote several articles where they criticized the views of Bloomsbury group. And the part of that Bloomsbury group, we have Virginia Woolf and her husband Leonardo Woolf. The next, the name of the work is Criticism of the Wasteland, and it is an essay written by F R Leavis. In this work, simply he says, or tells the readers, that how to read Wasteland. What should be the approach while reading Wasteland? He is not criticizing Wasteland. He is simply telling the way how one should, or how one can understand this great poem by T.S. Eliot, Wasteland. What should be the approach one should adopt? The next work by F R Leavis we have Great Tradition. This work was published in the year 1948. Great Tradition. So tradition, this work or this word actually we hear from T.S. Eliot the most. So what F R Leavis has to say about this? He says that there are four great novelists. And who are these four? The first, Jane Austen, then we have George Eliot, Henry James and Joseph Conrad. I would like to tell you a bit about just the famous work of these writers so that one can easily remember. Jane Austen, of course, we remember her for her great novels like Emma, Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, Mansfield Park or so. And then we have George Eliot, Mill on the Floss, his famous work, Middlemarch and Adam Bede. These are great for novels by her. Then we have Henry James. He is an American novelist. The famous works are like The Golden Bowl and A Portrait of the Lady and one more, Daisy Miller. And then we have Joseph Conrad. And one famous work which actually I went through, I read the complete that novella, that is Heart of Darkness. Anyhow, according to F R Leavis, these four are the great novelists. So one should follow these novelists, only then one can be great. He says that the great tradition, one can easily be the part of that if he follows the footprints or the guidelines of these four great novelists. He also admires Charles Dickens for his work, that is Hard Times. So just try to remember, he does not include Charles Dickens among the great four novelists, but he says that one work that worth praise written by Charles Dickens, and that is Hard Times. Then he includes one more writer, and the name of that writer is D.H. Lawrence, the famous author of the famous work. Actually, the work is Sons and Lovers, and D.H. Lawrence is included by him only after, or you can say later he included him. So initially there were the four great novelists, and later he included D.H. Lawrence among them. And now he talks about Jane Austen. He says that she is the central figure of that great tradition of English literature or English novels. He says that whoever followed her, and he gives the example that George Eliot followed her, and that is why George Eliot became famous, and he includes her. He says that George Eliot followed the footprints of Jane Austen. So Jane Austen, she is you can say the time when she was quite active writing, it was early part of the 19th century when she wrote novels. So it can be called as the pre-Victorian period or early Victorian period. And then we have George Eliot. She was predominantly writing in the almost in the middle of the 19th century, so mostly in the Victorian era. And then he takes more names like Charlotte Brontë among the Brontë sisters, the author of Wuthering Heights. And according to F R Leavis, Charlotte Brontë does not belong to that great tradition because her writing wasn't of that caliber. Another name he takes, that is Anthony Trollope, an American author, and he also criticized him that he does not belong to the same great tradition to which Jane Austen or other belongs. So that's all we have about F R Leavis and his views. The famous work is Great Tradition by him, published in the year 1948. And try to remember these names because there are several names. So if you can just mug up these names, or it is not that much difficult as well. If you can just go through the names of these writers one by one. We have Jane Austen, George Eliot, Joseph Conrad and Henry James as the great four novelists, as said by or according to F R Leavis. And fifth one, who was included later, the name is D.H. Lawrence, and he is criticizing the other writers like Charlotte Brontë and Anthony Trollope, and he praised which work of Charles Dickens, that is Hard Times. And one last thing, that he says that, or his belief actually behind great tradition is that a text compared to a standard of greats. A text means any work, if it is compared to the standards of great, only then it should be approved. Means, one, if you have written something, so your work should be compared to the great ones. If it is approved, only then it should be considered among the great ones. So there should be proper analysis, proper comparison. Everything should be done in this regard. So there was one question regarding this. In fact, there were two questions. The first, who were the great four novelists according to F R Leavis? We have Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James and Joseph Conrad. And one more question was there, preeminent evaluative criterion of a great tradition by F R Leavis. So what is the main criterion? How he thinks that any work should be great? What should be the main criteria? And the main criteria is moral purpose in teaching. So in any work there has to be some moral purpose behind, because it should give some moral lessons. Any novel, anything one is writing, there should be some moral lessons according to F R Leavis. So that's it we have in this lesson. I hope you must have enjoyed this lesson. So keep learning English literature. Have a great day.